Chapter 1: The Daughter Who Always Paid the Bill. This was supposed to be the day my own family took everything from me in court: my name, my past, my future. But they never expected the room to fall silent over a single document. They never expected uniformed officers to walk in while the judge was still reading, and they definitely never expected me to stay calm through it all. My name is Elena, and today I am not here to tell you a story about winning. I am here to tell you how silence, preparation, and one piece of paper can expose everything a family tried to bury. I used to think stability was my greatest strength. I built a life that did not shake easily. I worked hard. I showed up. I paid my bills on time. I raised my son with consistency and calm. From the outside, my life in the western suburbs of Chicago looked quiet and complete, but quiet lives have a way of hiding the loudest expectations. My name is Claire Holloway. I am 45 years old. For the last 13 years, I have worked as a senior operations manager at a regional logistics firm based in Schaumburg. I started there in 2011, back when the company was small and scrappy, when I was younger and more willing to stay late without being asked. I never chased titles. I chased reliability. Over time, that became my reputation. Claire will handle it. Claire will figure it out. Claire is steady. That same reputation followed me home. My parents live about 20 minutes away in a modest brick house they bought in the late 90s. They are proud of that house. It represents everything they believe about hard work and respectability. My father, Edward, is 71 now, retired from running a small printing business he sold years ago. He cares deeply about appearances. He likes things calm and orderly. My mother, Lorraine, is 69. She stayed home most of her adult life and took pride in being the emotional center of the family. She has always believed that love means keeping things from falling apart, even if it means leaning on the same person over and over. That person was usually me. My younger brother, Jason, is 39. He's charming in a way that draws people in quickly. He talks easily. He dreams big. He has always had a knack for convincing others that his next idea will be the one that finally works. After college, he drifted through a few sales jobs before landing in real estate. When he decided to start his own small brokerage, my parents were thrilled. They talked about him as if he were brave and visionary. When he needed help, they looked at me. It started small. A few $1,000s here and there, help with licensing fees, a loan to cover a slow quarter. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself family helps family. I paid for my parents' health insurance premiums when my father retired early. I covered unexpected property taxes when they came up short one year. I co-signed a line of credit for Jason when the bank hesitated. No one ever demanded these things outright. They were presented as needs, as moments where I could step in and make everything easier. And because I could, I did. Jason married Natalie about 7 years ago. She runs a lifestyle blog that focuses on home design and wellness. She is good at curating images. Their social media presence looks effortless. Smiling photos, renovation updates, family dinners with my parents framed just right. Watching them online, you would never guess how often my phone rang late at night with a request that started with, "I hate to ask, but..." The unspoken rule in my family was simple. Jason was the one with potential. I was the one with stability. He needed support to rise. I was expected to provide it quietly. I accepted that for a long time because it felt easier than questioning it. In 2015, my parents told us they were setting up a family trust. They said it was about planning, about making things simple down the line. I remember sitting at their kitchen table while my mother poured coffee and my father explained it in broad terms. It sounded sensible, responsible. I was told not to worry about the details, that they had a lawyer handling everything. I trusted them. I did not ask to see paperwork. I did not push to be involved. At that point, I still believed trust was a family matter, not a legal one. My son Ethan was 10 then. He's 18 now, preparing to leave for college. As he got older, he started to notice things I had trained myself not to dwell on. He noticed that when his grandparents talked about the future, they talked about Jason and Natalie, about the business, about the house. They talked less about me, except in terms of what I could do. Last year, as Ethan was filling out financial aid forms, he asked me questions I could not easily answer. Why do you help them so much? Why do they never help you? I brushed it off at first. I told him families are complicated, that keeping the peace mattered. But children have a way of seeing patterns adults explain away. The moment everything shifted came during a family dinner in December of 2023. It was one of those gatherings meant to feel warm and routine. Roast chicken, holiday decorations still half up. My parents were in the kitchen. Ethan was in the living room scrolling on his phone. I stepped out onto the back porch to take a call from work. When I came back inside, I heard voices coming from the hallway near my parents' bedroom. Jason and Natalie were speaking in low tones. They didn't realize I was there. Jason mentioned timing. Natalie responded that the next asset transfer needed to happen before the market changed. They spoke like people finalizing a plan, not like people guessing. I froze in the doorway, holding my phone, listening. My name did not come up. Not once. I did not interrupt them. I did not confront anyone. I finished dinner. I smiled. I drove home in silence. That night, lying in bed, I replayed the conversation over and over. It was not what they said that unsettled me most. It was how comfortable they sounded, how practiced, as if decisions had been made long before, without me, using resources I had helped build. I started thinking back to moments I had dismissed, how paperwork was always handled by Jason, how meetings with lawyers happened when I was working late, how my parents would say, "We'll explain later," and never quite did, how every conversation about money ended with reassurance instead of clarity. I realized something else that night. No one had ever actually lied to me. They simply never told me the whole truth. They let me assume my role. They let me fill in the blanks in a way that benefited them. In the weeks that followed, I paid closer attention. I listened more than I spoke. I noticed how my mother would tense when I asked even neutral questions, how my father redirected conversations back to family harmony, how Jason spoke with confidence about plans that didn't include me, even as he accepted my help without hesitation. Ethan noticed the change in me. He asked if something was wrong. I told him I was just tired. That was partly true. Carrying responsibility without recognition has a way of wearing you down slowly. One evening, after he went to bed, I sat alone at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I pulled up old bank statements, loan agreements, emails I had saved without thinking they would ever matter. I was not looking for proof of wrongdoing, not yet. I was trying to understand the shape of my own contribution, the quiet ways my stability had been woven into everyone else's plans. It was uncomfortable, not because I found anything shocking, but because I saw how normal it had all felt at the time, how easy it was to confuse love with obligation, how often I had chosen peace over clarity. By the end of that month, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever my family was doing with that trust, whatever decisions were being made behind closed doors, they were not accidents. And if I wanted to protect myself, I couldn't keep pretending that being steady meant invisible. I didn't feel ready to act. I was not angry enough for that. I was something else entirely, awake. And once you're awake, you start to understand that silence can be a choice. Not the kind that protects others, but the kind that gives you space to see exactly what you're standing on before you decide where to step next. Chapter 2. A Trust That Never Included Me. I did not confront anyone after that December dinner. I did not call my brother. I did not demand explanations from my parents. What I did instead was start noticing how often decisions were made without me, even when those decisions rested on money I had helped provide. The pattern became clearer once I allowed myself to see it. Between 2018 and 2023, there were several changes in my parents' finances that I only learned about after the fact. A rental property sold quietly, proceeds reinvested somewhere else, a line of credit refinanced under new terms. Each time I was informed casually, almost as an afterthought. Jason would mention it in passing. My mother would say it was all handled. My father would reassure me that everything was being done responsibly. At first, I told myself this was normal. I lived separately. I had my own life. Maybe I did not need to be involved. But the more I thought about it, the less that explanation held up. One afternoon in early spring, I stopped by my parents' house to drop off groceries. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table sorting mail. I noticed a familiar envelope from the county assessor tucked under a stack of magazines. It caught my attention because I had dealt with those notices before, when helping them cover a shortfall years earlier. I picked it up and asked casually if property taxes had gone up again. My mother hesitated, just for a second. Then she said everything was taken care of. She told me not to worry. That was when I asked her whose name the house was under now. She looked at me like I had asked something impolite. She said the house was part of the trust, the Holloway family trust, and that it made things simpler. When I asked when that had changed, she said she did not remember exactly. A while back, Jason handled the paperwork. Later that night, after I got home, I logged into my old email accounts. I searched for anything related to the trust. There were very few messages, mostly vague updates. Nothing detailed, nothing that required my input. A week later, I decided to ask directly. We were all together again for my father's birthday. After dinner, while Natalie helped my mother clear the table and Ethan was outside with the dog, I asked about the trust. I asked how decisions were made and who had authority. My father leaned back in his chair and said it was structured to minimize taxes and avoid complications later. He said it was standard planning. When I pressed, he waved his hand and said Jason had a better head for those things. Jason smiled and said it was all perfectly legal. He said the lawyer had set it up that way. He told me I was worrying too much. I told him I just wanted to understand. That was when my mother spoke up. She said I always had to turn everything into a numbers issue. She said I made things uncomfortable by analyzing instead of trusting. She said I should stop treating family like a business transaction. Ethan came back inside just in time to hear that. He asked what she meant by that. My mother sighed and said I was always counting what I gave instead of appreciating what we had. She said I made generosity feel conditional. I felt something twist in my chest, not anger, something sharper. I told her I was not counting anything. I said I just wanted transparency. I said I had contributed for years and thought it was fair to know how things were structured. Jason jumped in then. He said I was being sensitive. He said everything was under control. He said I should trust him. Trust. That word again. After we left, Ethan was quiet in the car. When we got home, he asked why his grandmother thought I was selfish. I did not know how to answer that without unraveling everything at once. That night, I reached out to Rachel Kim. We had known each other for nearly 20 years. She was a certified public accountant with experience in forensic work. We met for coffee a few days later. I told her the situation without drama. I told her I felt excluded. I told her I suspected that assets were being shifted in ways I did not understand. I told her I was not looking to accuse anyone. I just wanted clarity. Rachel listened. She asked practical questions. Who managed the trust? Who were the beneficiaries? Who had signing authority? What documentation I had? When I said I had very little, she nodded slowly. She told me something that stuck. She said that exclusion is rarely accidental in financial structures. She said systems do not forget people. People decide where systems point. Over the next few weeks, she helped me reconstruct a timeline using what little information I had.
public records, old statements, property filings. It didn't take long to see the shape of it. The trust had been amended multiple times. Each amendment increased Jason's role. Each adjustment reduced the need for my consent. Contributions were recorded as gifts rather than investments. My involvement was acknowledged financially, but not structurally. In simple terms, I was the source, not the stakeholder. The biggest shock came when Rachel showed me the property records for my parents' house. The house was now fully held by the trust. Its assessed value was just over $600,000. The initial down payment years ago had come largely from a transfer I made after selling my first condo. At the time, it felt like helping my parents secure their retirement. Now, legally, it meant nothing. I sat there staring at the numbers while Rachel waited quietly. I asked her if any of it was illegal. She said not necessarily. She said it was carefully done. She said whoever structured it understood exactly how to avoid requiring my signature. She also said something else. She said the absence of my name was not an oversight. It was a choice repeated over time. That stayed with me on the drive home. I replayed every conversation where I had been told not to worry, every moment where peace was used as a reason to stay uninformed. I realized how often I had accepted reassurance instead of clarity, because clarity might have forced conflict. By the end of that summer, I knew I could no longer pretend this was about misunderstanding. It was about control, and about who was allowed to have it. I was still not angry. Anger would have pushed me to react too quickly. What I felt instead was resolve. If I had been written out quietly, then I would read every line that led there. I would understand every structure built around my silence, and I would decide my next move with the same care they had used to make theirs. For the first time in years, I was no longer trying to keep everything together. I was trying to see the truth clearly, even if it meant standing alone with it.
Chapter 3: Silence as a Calculated Move. That clarity reshaped everything I did, even when it looked like nothing had changed. During the day, I played my role the same way I always had. I stopped by my parents' house on Sundays. I brought groceries and asked about doctor's appointments. I listened while my father talked about the neighborhood and the weather. I nodded while my mother told the same stories about people I barely remembered. From the outside, I was still the dependable daughter who kept things smooth. At night, after Ethan went to bed and the house settled into silence, I became someone else. I sat at my dining table with my laptop open and a legal pad beside it. Rachel and I talked most evenings. Sometimes we spoke for 10 minutes. Other nights it stretched past midnight. She taught me how to read trust amendments slowly, line by line, without emotion. She showed me how to track property transfers through public records and how to notice what was missing as much as what was there. One night, after I told her I felt foolish for not seeing this sooner, she said something quietly. "You were busy holding everything together. That is how people miss what is being built behind them." Those words stayed with me. Jason noticed my change before anyone else. He started calling more often. He asked for my opinion on potential deals. He wanted reassurance. He wanted my familiar encouragement. I gave him none of it. One afternoon, while I was driving home from work, my phone rang. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked. "No," I said. "You sound distant," he said. "I just want to make sure we are good." "We are good," I replied. There was a pause on the line. "You would tell me if something was wrong, right?" he asked. "Of course," I said. I ended the call with my hands steady on the wheel and my heart calm. I was not lying. I was just no longer explaining. The real tension surfaced through Ethan. One Saturday, he went to my parents' house alone to help my father with yard work. When he came home, he dropped his backpack by the door and sat at the kitchen counter without speaking. I asked him what was wrong. He hesitated, then said,
Grandma said you are causing problems. I kept my voice even. What kind of problems? I asked. She said you are asking questions you do not need answers to, he said. She said you are making everyone uncomfortable. I took a breath. What did you say? I asked. I asked her why understanding things was bad, he said. She cried. A few days later, my mother called me. She sounded tired but controlled. I do not understand why you are pulling away, she said. We are a family. Why are you making things feel cold? I am not pulling away, I said. I am just paying attention. Sometimes paying attention hurts people, she replied. That was when I understood something clearly. She was not afraid of my anger. She was afraid of my awareness. The biggest shift came when Rachel uncovered an old email chain buried deep in archived records. She sent it to me without comment. I opened it late one night and read it twice before the meaning settled. Years earlier, my mother had written to the attorney who helped structure the trust. She asked about consolidating authority. She wrote that Jason needed flexibility to make decisions without interference. She asked how to structure things so that family contributions would not complicate control. This was not confusion, this was intention. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling something inside me grow very still. The next evening, I drove to my parents' house and asked my mother if we could talk. My father was watching television in the other room. I sat across from her on the couch, my phone face down in my hand. I asked her a simple question. When the trust was changed, did you want Jason to have control? She looked at me for a long time before answering. I wanted things to be simple, she said. For who? I asked. For the family, she replied. Did you think about how that would affect me? I asked. She looked down at her hands. You are strong, she said. You always land on your feet. That was her answer. I did not show her the email. I did not argue. I stood up, kissed her cheek, and left. That was the moment I stopped believing this was about misunderstanding or weakness. It was about choice. Rachel and I kept going. She uncovered more signs that the family attorney, Mark Ellison, had raised mild concerns years earlier. He had suggested more balanced beneficiary language. Those suggestions had been acknowledged, then quietly ignored. The system had not failed, it had been guided. I thought often about confrontation, about what it would feel like to lay everything out and demand accountability, but every time I imagined it, I saw the same ending: tears, deflection, accusations of selfishness, no real change. So I made a decision. I would not expose them emotionally. I would let the truth surface through the legal framework they trusted to protect them. From that point on, every interaction became deliberate. When my mother asked if I could help cover a short-term expense, I said I needed time to review my own obligations. When Jason talked about new properties, I asked neutral questions and made quiet notes. When my father spoke about family unity, I listened without correcting him. I became careful with my words, careful with my silence. That silence gave me space to think, space to plan, space to decide what kind of outcome I wanted. I did not want to destroy my family. I wanted my name restored to its rightful place. By the end of that year, I knew exactly what I was doing. I was no longer waiting to be included. I was preparing to move forward, not with emotion, but with facts. And when that moment came, I would not need to raise my voice. The structure they trusted would speak for me.
Chapter 4. When the numbers spoke louder than blood. The next step was not dramatic. It was deliberate, and that was what made it impossible to ignore. Rachel finished the forensic accounting report in early March of 2024. She did not attach explanations or warnings. She sent the file and followed it with a single message: read it alone. Call me when you're done. I waited until Ethan was asleep. I sat at the dining table where I had spent months turning confusion into structure. The report was calm in its language and heavy in its implications. It traced amendments to the Holloway family trust over several years. It mapped property transfers, changes in authority, and the way my financial contributions had been recorded, not as investments, not as stakes, as gifts. There was a section near the end that made my chest tighten. It outlined potential audit exposure if the trust continued operating the way it had. Not a certainty, a risk, but a real one. When I called Rachel, she did not rush me. "This isn't emotional leverage," she said. "This is governance, and governance demands response." I asked her what the next step was. "You take it to the attorney who has a duty to the trust," she said, "not as an accusation, as a disclosure." That attorney was Mark Ellison, the same man my parents trusted, the same man who had quietly raised concerns years earlier that were never acted on. I called his office and requested a meeting. The receptionist hesitated before confirming. 2 days later, I sat across from Mark in a glass conference room overlooking downtown Naperville. He smiled politely, asked about my son, asked about work. Then I placed the report on the table. His expression changed immediately. "What is this?" he asked. "A forensic review," I said, "prepared by a CPA." He opened it slowly, scanning the first pages. "Why are you bringing this to me?" he asked. "Because the trust is exposed," I said, "and because I have been excluded from decisions involving assets I contributed to." He closed the file and leaned back. "This is serious," he said. "I know, that's why I'm here." He asked if I planned to take legal action. "No," I said. "I want transparency and protection. For everyone." That answer mattered. I saw it in the way his shoulders settled. "I'll need to call a formal trust meeting," he said, "all parties present." That evening, Jason called me. "Mark contacted me," he said. His tone was controlled but sharp. "What did you give him?" "Information," I said. "You could have talked to me," he replied. "I tried. You told me to trust you." There was silence on the line. The meeting was scheduled for mid-April. Mark chose his office. Neutral ground. Professional ground. My parents arrived first. My mother wore a careful smile. My father looked uneasy, his hands folded too tightly in his lap. Jason and Natalie came together. Jason walked with confidence that felt rehearsed. Natalie stayed close, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Mark opened the meeting formally. He spoke about fiduciary duty, about governance, about risk. His tone was measured and precise. Then he distributed copies of the report. Jason flipped through the pages quickly and scoffed. "This is overkill," he said. "You're turning family into a courtroom." "This is not a courtroom," Mark replied. "This is a trust review." My mother turned to me. "Why would you do this?" she asked softly. "Why couldn't you just talk to us?" "I did," I said, "for years." Jason leaned forward. "You always make things complicated. Everything was working fine." "For you," I replied. My father cleared his throat. "Can we not argue?" he said. "We're a family." Natalie stepped in gently. "Everyone is stressed. Maybe we should focus on feelings instead of documents." Mark interrupted calmly. "Feelings don't eliminate risk. The trust, as structured, carries exposure." Jason's jaw tightened. "What exposure?" he asked. Mark explained. He pointed to patterns: authority consolidation, contribution classification, the lack of documented consent. He did not accuse, he described. As he spoke, Jason's posture changed. His confidence cracked. "This is because she can't stand that I'm in charge," he said, turning toward me. "You always were the perfect one, the reliable one. Mom and Dad never worried about you. I had to fight for that." My mother gasped. "Jason," she whispered. He kept going. "Every time you helped, it made me look weak. You could give money and still act like you were above it." I met his gaze. "I never wanted to be above you. I wanted to be respected." Natalie tried to calm him. "Stop," she said quietly. He shook his head. "You needed this," he said to me. "You needed to win." I don't need to win, I replied. I need the truth. Mark raised his hand slightly. Here's what needs to happen. The trust must be restructured, authority balanced, beneficiary language clarified, documentation completed. If not, the risk remains. Jason stared at him. You're siding with her. He said, I'm siding with the law and with protecting your parents. My father's voice trembled. You mean an audit? He asked. It's possible and preventable. My mother's composure finally broke. What do we do? Mark outlined the steps. Amendments, signatures, transparency. Everyone involved, including me. Jason sat rigid. Natalie looked down. No one apologized. Finally, Jason exhaled. Fine, he said. We'll do it. Not an apology, a concession. The meeting ended quietly. In the hallway, my father touched my arm. Why didn't you tell us sooner? He asked. I did, I said. You just didn't hear me until it sounded official. He nodded, ashamed. When I walked outside, the air felt lighter, not because I had won, because the truth no longer depended on my silence. The balance in my family had shifted, not through anger, but through structure, and that was something no one could take back.
Chapter 5. Walking away with my name intact. That decision carried me through the months that followed, steady and irreversible. The trust amendments did not happen all at once. There were drafts that came back marked with comments, conference calls where lawyers spoke carefully and no one raised their voice, forms that arrived in thick envelopes, each one requiring signatures that felt heavier than they looked. Nothing about the process was dramatic. It was procedural, precise, and unmistakably final. By the spring of 2025, it was over. I sat in Mark Ellison's office for the last time, the same neutral conference room where so much tension had quietly unfolded months earlier. The final documents were laid out in front of me. My name appeared exactly where it should have, clearly and without ambiguity. My contributions were acknowledged. My share was defined. No more, no less. When I signed the last page and slid the papers back across the table, Mark nodded once. This formally separates you from the trust, he said. You won't have any ongoing financial obligation. I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, what washed over me was something quieter, relief, the kind that loosens your chest when you realize you no longer have to stay alert for the next request or the next explanation. When I walked out of that building, the sky was overcast. Traffic moved slowly. Life looked exactly the same. And yet, I knew something fundamental had changed. For the first time in years, I stopped paying. I did not announce it. I did not make a statement. I simply stopped stepping in. When my mother called and mentioned an unexpected expense, I listened and told her I hoped it worked out. When my father hinted about rising costs, I sympathized without offering solutions. When Jason reached out to talk about tightening margins and delayed closings, I wished him well. Each conversation ended without the familiar transfer of responsibility. At first, the silence that followed felt uncomfortable, like I had dropped something fragile and was waiting for the sound of it breaking. But nothing broke. The world kept turning. Other people adjusted. Jason adjusted the hardest. Without my quiet support, his business became smaller, not a failure, but no longer inflated by borrowed stability. He talked less about expansion and more about survival. The confidence in his voice softened into something closer to realism. We spoke occasionally. Our conversations stayed polite and distant. There was no apology between us. There was also no argument. My parents changed in subtler ways. My mother still called, but her questions were different now. She talked about her health, about neighbors, about television shows she liked. Money no longer hovered beneath every word. The calls became shorter, then less frequent. Not colder, just clearer. My father stopped asking me for advice entirely. When we spoke, he asked about my work, about Ethan, about small things.
It felt like he had finally accepted that I was no longer the person who would catch the family before it stumbled. There was a strange peace in that acceptance. Ethan left for college that fall. We loaded his car early in the morning, boxes of books, a desk lamp, clothes folded too carefully. When we reached campus, he moved with the easy confidence of someone stepping into a future that belonged to him alone. As we hugged goodbye outside his dorm, he looked at me for a long moment. "I'm proud of you," he said, "for what you did." My throat tightened. "I just stopped doing what hurt me," I said. "That still counts," he replied. Driving home alone that day, I realized how much lighter the road felt without the weight of quiet resentment riding beside me. Rachel and I stayed close. Our conversations shifted away from documents and deadlines to dinners and long walks. One evening, we sat on my back porch as the sun dipped behind the trees. She asked me if I felt like it had all been worth it. "I don't feel like I won," I said. She smiled softly. "That's usually how you know it wasn't about winning." She was right. I did not watch my family fall apart. I did not see anyone punished in a way that satisfied anger. There was no moment where someone admitted they were wrong and asked for forgiveness. What I gained was quieter but deeper. I stopped losing. I stopped paying for peace that only flowed one way. I stopped mistaking endurance for love. I stopped believing that being reliable meant being invisible. The distance between my family and me never fully closed. Holidays became simpler, less performative. Conversations stayed polite and safe. We no longer pretended that everything was fine, and in a strange way, that honesty felt more respectful than the closeness we once forced. I learned that boundaries do not always arrive with conflict. Sometimes they arrive with paperwork and patience, and the courage to let people feel the consequences of their own systems. Revenge, I realized, is often misunderstood. It is not about watching someone else suffer. It is not about proving your worth through destruction. Sometimes revenge looks like refusing to keep paying the cost of someone else's comfort. Sometimes it looks like walking away with your name intact. If you're hearing this and something in it feels familiar, if you're the one who always holds things together, the one who fixes and smooths and absorbs, I hope you take this with you. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to step back from structures that only work because you stay silent inside them. Preparation is not cruelty. Boundaries are not punishment. Dignity does not require permission. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think about your own place in someone else's system, I invite you to stay here. Stories like this are not about rage, they are about clarity, about proof, about choosing yourself without tearing anyone else down. Sometimes the strongest form of revenge is simply living a life that no longer requires your silence.